This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Jerusalem holy site shrouded in snow from a rare Mideast storm. And Israel grapples with its vaccination campaign. Plus, what impact did the Abraham Accords have on the BDS movement? And President Biden finally calls Prime Minister Netanyahu. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Jerusalemites woke up to a blanket of snow after a rare Mideast storm dropped snow on Jerusalem, northern Israel, and other parts of the Middle East. The snowfall began in the evening. Even at midnight, Israelis were out in the city's main park, enjoying the rare chance to play in the snow. Jerusalem's iconic sites were shrouded in snow, including the Old City.
Nothing is normal in the Middle East. Why should the weather be any different? This is amazing. It's fantastic to look around and see all this white stuff covering these ancient stones.
Up to 6 inches of snow accumulated, causing collateral damage, including the car of one of CBN's videographers. But for the most part, Israelis just enjoyed a break from news on the pandemic and the upcoming elections. Central Israel gets snow about every 5 years, but the last big snow was in 2013 when more than a foot fell overnight. Well, Israel is a world leader in vaccinations, although the pace of Israelis getting their shots has slowed down. While government leaders work to vaccinate greater numbers, they face obstacles in the form of misinformation, public health, and personal privacy. Israel recently celebrated their 4 millionth Israeli to get their first vaccination shot. Out of that 4 million, nearly 3 million have had both shots. That's quite an accomplishment for a country of just over 9 million citizens. Israel has seen more than 700,000 COVID cases and 5,400 deaths. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu worries misinformation is keeping many Israelis from lining up for the shot.
The only thing that currently prevents the completion of this vaccination process is fake news and the superstitious and sometimes malicious beliefs that are planted among the public and on the internet and other places. Don't believe them.
In an effort to increase numbers, Netanyahu wants legislation that would provide the names of those not vaccinated to local governments. Health Minister Yuli Edelstein advocates allowing employers to prevent the unvaccinated citizens from coming to work. They face major pushback as so-called anti-vaxxers use posters and the web to spread messages like, "You're experimented on like lab rats. The vaccine is a death shot." The government counters with posters like this, which reads, "False information and lies endanger us."
People in the emergency fake news room, they are monitoring social media. The moment they see a fake news, they transfer the information to the cyber department in the Ministry of Justice.
While the government is monitoring and censoring social media, a number of Israelis remain convinced the vaccinations are not safe.
This whole thing, it's research, an experiment with unknown side effects. It's not like taking today a measles or flu vaccine. This is a totally new drug, new technology.
On Sunday, the government will enforce new regulations, stopping the unvaccinated from using gyms, attending sporting events, or going to a hotel. Israelis completing the two-step vaccination process will be issued a new green passport that will permit them access to those same venues. About 2,000 rallied in Tel Aviv this week, not to protest the vaccine, but for the freedom to choose whether or not to take it.
This has raised a bit of a dilemma, which is how should society, how should the government relate to people who have not been inoculated or vaccinated, or who refuse to do so.
Commentator and columnist Michael Freund says the growing fight over public health versus individual privacy and freedom could soon boil over.
One that I think every Western democracy at some point or another has to confront.
Israel becomes one of the world's first democracies to reach this stage in the pandemic fight. What's more important? Protecting public safety with strict vaccination measures, or preserving the beliefs, rights, and freedoms of its citizens. Could the recent Abraham Accords lead to a significant setback for the BDS movement against Israel? For years, BDS supporters have argued that economic weapons like boycotts and sanctions would be the key route to peace. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl looks at how the Peace for Peace formula is proving them wrong.
The roots of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel go back hundreds of years.
BDS movement is nothing new here. I mean, economic boycotts have been a key hallmark manifestation of anti-Semitism from time immemorial.
Ilan Carr, a Trump administration envoy to combat anti-Semitism, says from the Middle Ages to Nazi Germany, economic boycotts have been a weapon against Jewish communities.
That's what BDS is. BDS is don't buy from the Jews. In this case, the Jewish state, the Jewish collective. So there's really nothing new about this malicious, evil form manifestation of Jew hatred.
And what we found were dozens of examples of where you have senior leadership of BDS propagating anti-Semitic ethos, motifs, libels, conspiracy theories.
Now, some see the economic agreement in the recent Abraham Accords between Israel and 4 Muslim countries as a strike against BDS.
I saw one headline that said the Abraham Accords mark the death of the BDS movement. Now, I think that's a little premature, but we certainly can say that the Abraham Accords are the beginning of the end of the BDS movement.
They've suffered a major blowback to their narrative, saying that boycotts are the answer to peace. The Abraham Accords have clearly shown that that is not the case.
Ben Moore of Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs says while BDS is reeling from this defeat, it won't stop them.
Their end goal is to harm Israel in any way possible, so it's very likely they'll just find a new avenue of attack.
One recent example shows that BDS can draw support from a more recent movement. In this virtual discussion group, Temple University professor Mark Lamont Hill claims Israel is part of white supremacist imperialism.
And so Black Lives Matter very explicitly is talking about the dismantling of a Zionist project, dismantling of a settler colonial project, and very explicitly embracing BDS on those grounds.
According to Moore, BDS has been trying to hijack the progressive value system for more than a decade. He sees the Abraham Accords as the best way to fight BDS and the anti-Semitism behind it. He also emphasizes the importance of listening to the ultimate message of this dangerous movement.
One just needs to look at their mantra, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That doesn't leave much room in the middle for Israel to exist.
Carr hopes and believes the Biden administration will keep up the fight against anti-Semitism.
Secretary Blinken praised the Abraham Accords and said this is the path for the future. The administration expressed its deep concern over the ICC decision about the thought of prosecuting the heroes of the Israel Defense Forces or the heroes of the U.S. Armed Forces.
Even so, both Carr and Moore maintain that it's important to remember that neither BDS nor anti-Semitism will simply fade away. They encourage supporters of Israel to keep an eye on the movement, its leaders and allies. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, how did the first call go between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu? The U.S. announced it will be re-entering the Iranian nuclear deal. In a statement, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said, going back to the old agreement will pave Iran's path to a nuclear arsenal. Before the announcement, President Biden made his first call to Netanyahu a month after taking office. Biden's delay in calling Netanyahu led to concerns that ties between the two allies would not be as warm as during the Trump era. To understand more about the Israel-U.S. relations after that call, I interviewed former Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon. Ambassador Danon, thanks for joining us here on Jerusalem Dateline. Last night, it seems like finally there was a phone call between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Biden. You had famously put on the Prime Minister's phone number to encourage the president to call. What do you see next after they finally made this phone call?
So indeed, Chris, it was an important phone call, and now it's time to move on to deal with the main issues. And the first issue is Iran. Only a few days from now, Iran will have to decide what they are doing regarding the inspections, what will be their policy, and the US will have to react to that. So now is the time to work together, and I believe that Israel and the US will continue to cooperate against Iran. And I hope that the new administration will not try to appease the Iranians, but will actually apply more pressure against them.
Do you have concerns about some of the appointments now by the Biden administration? Actually, some of the same people that negotiated the 2015 JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal.
Well, I'm not looking at the people, I'm looking at the policy. And it's important to understand that today, Iran of 2021 is not Iran of 2015. A lot of things changed since then. And re-entering the agreement today, it will be a mistake. I would advise the US first to speak with their allies, maybe even to call them to Washington, D.C., to have a summit with Prime Minister Netanyahu, leaders from the Gulf, the strong allies of the US in the region, and together with them to think about the policy in the region. Re-entering the agreement and then trying to negotiate will not be helpful.
It does seem that Iran is getting bolder in terms of their nuclear program, enriching uranium to 20%, researching uranium metal, and actually increasing the amount of uranium. Are you concerned about the way Iran is acting right now after President Biden has been inaugurated?
Absolutely, we are worried because the Iranians breached the agreement from the beginning. When we revealed the archives from Tehran, we actually proved to the world that they were lying from the beginning, and they are continuing to do it. So my advice is not to believe them, to look at what they are actually doing on the ground. And as you mentioned, they continue to enrich uranium, they continue to test ballistic missiles, they continue to support their proxies. And I think the right approach is to apply sanctions and to demand them to change the course they are taking.
There are some other concerns people have about the administration. For example, just a little while ago, a reporter asked a spokeswoman that is Israel and Saudi Arabia allies of the U.S., and it basically was a non-answer. Are you concerned about some of the answers we're coming out of the White House right now?
That's a fact. You cannot change the fact that Israel is the closest ally of the U.S. It's based on mutual values, and nothing can change it. But I'm not concerned about statements. I'm worried about actions, policy. And I think in the next few days, we will actually be able to see where the new administration is heading regarding the Iranian regime, whether they are trying to appease them or they are actually, as they promised, they will be tough on the issue and they will not allow them to continue with their nuclear ambitions. So I think within a week, we will know more where they are heading.
There was a large full-scale exercise up on the northern border. Are you also concerned about the growing threat of Hezbollah's number of missiles and their ambitions against the state of Israel?
It is a problem. You know, I served as the Deputy Minister of Defense, and what we see today that the Iranians are funding Hezbollah. They have hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles. And I'm telling to the Lebanese government and to the Lebanese people, if you don't take your act now, if you will not prevent Hezbollah from massing their missiles next to our border, you will pay the price. The consequences will be painful. And I would advise the Lebanese government to take action today before it's too late.
Final question, Ambassador. In the next 4 years, how do you see Israel dealing with a new administration?
So, you know, we believe that we can work together. We want to work together. We have a lot in common. And I'm optimistic by nature, but I can tell you one thing for sure. We cannot compromise on our security. The main threat to our security today is nuclear Iran. So hopefully the US will lead the efforts against nuclear Iran, but we are ready to do whatever is necessary to protect ourselves.
Ambassador Danon, I appreciate your time being here with us.
Thank you very much.
Up next, CBN's latest documentary, Written in Stone, The House of David. When we come back. For those who believe the Bible, King David was the ruler of ancient Israel. But for a long time, skeptics said there was no proof he existed. Now CBN's new documentary, Written in Stone, House of David, examines how archaeologists are finding more and more evidence of that biblical kingdom. Take a look at how modern biblical archaeology in the Holy Land began in this preview of CBN's new film.
In the summer of 1864, one of the wealthiest women in England decided to take a trip. Baroness Angela Burdett Coutts belonged to one of the world's oldest banking families. She was a philanthropist to whom Charles Dickens dedicated one of his novels, a London socialite whose circle included the royal family. And without realizing it, she was about to introduce the world to the archaeology of the Bible. When the Baroness went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, she was appalled by the widespread disease and lack of good drinking water in Jerusalem. So she donated 500 pounds to survey the city for clean water. The Water Relief Fund became a popular cause with the British people. So its patrons expanded their survey to study the archaeology of the Holy Land, and the Palestine Exploration Fund was born. Holy Land fever swept through Britain, and the Baroness even convinced her friend Vicky to sponsor the new organization. Vicky was none other than Queen Victoria, and in 1867, the Queen sent a team to Jerusalem to excavate the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Temple Mount. Leading the team was an army engineer named Charles Warren, who would later become famous as the London Police Commissioner who led the hunt for the notorious serial killer, Jack the Ripper. Warren stayed in Palestine for 3 years, and his extraordinary discoveries made headlines around the world. After being buried for nearly 1,800 years, the Jerusalem of the Bible was about to be rediscovered.
Charles Warren discovered the city of David, or the ancient Jerusalem, in 1867. It was exactly 100 years before her reunification in 1967. Up till 150 years ago, nobody saw her, nobody even knew where she was until Charles Warren made the first rediscovery. And suddenly, Isaiah, that prophesied, Hitna arim me'afar kumi, shake off your dust, arise, take your rightful place, O Jerusalem. Suddenly this is happening. The first time when we read about Jerusalem, it's in Genesis, when Abram meets with Melchizedek right here in the valley of Kidron. And Melchizedek is the king of Salem, or as we say in Hebrew, Shalem. And they meet here and they break bread together and they drink wine. And also it's the first time that we read that a tithe is being given to Jerusalem by Abram. Abram, the man in whom all the nations will be blessed.
In Jerusalem, little is left from the time of the patriarchs. But less than 20 miles away, in the West Bank city of Hebron, these Bronze Age remains show glimpses of the city where Abraham pitched his tents. Nearby is the Cave of the Patriarchs, the site of biblical Machpelah. As far back as 1000 BC, this location was recognized as the place where Abraham purchased a cave to bury his wife Sarah. The monument, built by King Herod, is said to house the tombs of the patriarchs and their wives. And although Abraham is the father of the nation of Israel, the archaeology of the Bible truly begins nearly 800 years later with one of his descendants, Israel's most famous king.
Still ahead, more of Jerusalem as a winter wonderland. Since we don't see snow too often here in Jerusalem, we wanted to leave you with a few more images of the Holy City in white.
We wish it will be here like every year.
There's no age to enjoy the snow. We don't need more than this.
This is amazing. It's fantastic to look around and see all this white stuff covering these ancient stones.
Well, it was a joy to see the snow here in Jerusalem and to see so many around the city enjoying it. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blast so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.